Okay, the first of our keynote speakers is Darren Fittler. He is a passionate lawyer serving charities and not-for-profit organisations for over a decade, and he's had quite a journey from a small country town. He lost most of his sight to retinal dystrophy between the ages of 5 and 13. He moved to Sydney. He gained a social work degree, a wife, kids, and a partnership in a top law firm. If that wasn't enough, he was the first blind person to complete the Tough Mudder 21-kilometre obstacle course. He's won the battle for Braille ballot papers. He helped develop the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability in the United Nations. And he is only 4 months from a Tae Kwon Do black belt grading. So thank you, and over to you, Darren.
Thanks so much for that, Mike. It's been a pleasure to be here. Can I just firstly check that I can be heard okay?
Yes.
Perfect.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's very interesting to hear someone read out your bio, and you sometimes think to yourself, are they actually talking about me? And so that does sound, like an interesting life. And I think I would say that I have had an interesting life. But what's interesting really is that I never planned to have an interesting life, and I never planned to do all of these things. A lot of these things have come my way and have occurred because I embraced the opportunity. I grew up in the bush. I grew up in a little country town outside of Coffs Harbour, and my primary school was a mainstream primary school. My primary school had 90 children all the way from kindergarten to year 6. And most of the classes were multi-classes in the same classroom. And on the farm I lived on, we didn't own the farm, but we rented the house on the farm. And I was just raised like anyone else. I had a mum and dad, and my grandmother lived with us, and I have a younger brother. He's 2 years younger than I am, and he has no vision impairment or no sort of disability in that way. So when my brother got a BMX bike, I got a BMX bike. When we had to chop wood for the fire, I had to chop wood for the fire. When it was time to wash the dishes, I washed the dishes. And so I'm not sure. I mean, my parents were young when I was born, as it was more common back then. My parents were in their early 20s, around 23 years old when I was born. And I was their first child. And so I was diagnosed with my condition at 5. And for a long time, I think my parents and others thought that maybe I was just a bit lazy because I wouldn't go and grab that soccer ball, or maybe a bit clumsy when I'd start tripping over things. But after a while, it became, I think, a bit more obvious that there was something more to it. My first diagnosis was long-sightedness or short-sightedness. I can't remember, one or the other. It was wrong, whichever one it was. And it was only with some persistence and then a trip to Sydney and to the eye hospital to see Professor Wilson that they took photographs of my eyes and had a good poke around and a look around. And anyone on this call will be familiar with getting the eye drops in and your eyes, getting big pupils and having to sit around in waiting rooms for hours and hours, even though you were first there, somehow still having to wait. And that was very interesting for me because not only was that annoying as a 6, 7, 8-year-old kid, but I hadn't really been to the city before. And I had very vivid memories of the escalators coming out of Martin Place railway station in Sydney thinking, wow, what are these moving stairs? And man, they just keep going forever. These are like the longest staircase in the world. So even in those early days of getting my diagnosis, I guess it was a bit of an adventure leaving my country town for those short periods of time. But with assistance at school, with itinerant teachers and with teachers' aides, I got through my primary school. And back then, we didn't really have computers. I learnt to type on a big, clunky, everyday, regular typewriter, which some on this call will know about, others might not. And I have to say that being taught to type, when it wasn't even in the school curriculum, being taken out of class and specifically taught to type was probably the best gift that I was ever given. And even now to be able to touch type is one of the fundamental assets that I have that's allowed me to, participate and achieve in my studies and my work alongside my peers. by the time I got to year 6 and I was about to transition to year 7, I was losing most of my sight then. And I was taught Braille. And I used Braille a bit, but mostly I just used my memory. I didn't really want to look like I was blind. I didn't want others to see that I was blind. I should have been using a white cane, but I didn't use a white cane. I now have shins like hockey players. I joke that one day people are going to excavate my grave if I have one, and they'll find my shin bones and come to some conclusion that I was some warrior or some laborer, because of the state of my bones are very, very chipped and damaged from all of the things I've walked into during my life, particularly in my younger years. And transitioning to high school was a bit of a tough time, because my kindergarten to year 6 school had 90 kids. Year 7 had 100 kids. The whole school had more than 1,000. And even though I did a little bit of preparation work with teachers and others getting to the high school and having a walk around beforehand to get familiar with the layout, it was quite a big shock to the system. Moving from classroom to classroom, having different teachers, having literally hundreds of kids around me that I didn't know and who didn't know me. And of course, I'm not using a cane. I'm not wearing glasses because they're no use to me at this point. So, you know, when I bump into people or trip over things, again, I was, you know, the guy that looked a little bit silly, a little bit stupid, a little bit awkward, a little bit odd. But that was year 9 was when I got my first talking computer. And by this time I'm touch typing on regular, more keyboard-like keyboards, and my itinerant teacher and I were very interested in the technology, which means that my Braille skills went a little bit to the back burner. And so for me, I would encourage anybody who's starting to learn Braille or is learning Braille or has learned Braille to keep those skills up. I wish I was a more proficient Braille reader, and I can sort of talk more about that a little bit later. But if you are learning Braille or can, I encourage you, please keep it up. It'll be a great skill to have, and great for your literacy, great for your spelling. My spelling's not the best even now at the age of 45, because I guess I always listen to words. I don't often, you know, read them as such with my fingers or in any other way. And so year 9, 10, 11, 12, moved through and completed my HSC. And at that point, it was about choosing what degree to do, what university to go to, and what my life might be looking like into the future. One of my big aims really was to get out of Coffs Harbour. And I remember my dad saying, "Oh, there's a perfectly good branch of a university here in Coffs Harbour. Why don't you stay here?" I said, "Oh, Dad, it's unfortunate, but there's just no subjects being done at this university that I would like to do." My choice was to do a combined degree in social work law. My marks were not good enough for that, but they were good enough just for social work. So I packed up my bags and I moved to Sydney at the age of 18 and started my university career. There's lots of stories to be told around that, but I managed to find my way into one of the on-campus colleges where I spent my first 2 years, made some great friends, met some really awesome people, didn't do as well in my studies as I would have liked to transition to law, but that's okay. University is for times of exploration and enjoyment and fun and other things as well. It's not all just about study, study, study. And I have no regrets about that. I left university having studied there, and most of my courses at that point was done through textbooks. We're at a time when there's nothing online yet. I sent my textbooks to the Royal Blind Society as it was at the time. They read them onto a cassette for me, and they sent the cassettes back to me, and then I listened to them. And by the time they'd read the textbooks out onto a cassette and send them to me, it was towards the end of the session. So I had to do a lot of cramming at the end. So what I would do is I would go to class, I would listen as best I could, I would take notes after the class, and then I would consolidate my learning once the textbooks arrived. So I had lots of fun in the first sort of 10 weeks of most sessions, and then the last 3 or 4 was all hands on deck. And that taught me a really interesting skill and a useful skill that I was forced to learning. But the idea of having a good memory is something that has stood me in good stead over the years. And one really key component to a good memory is good listening. And listening meaning actually really concentrating on what's being said and thinking about it at the same time. And if you're in a class and you're scribbling down notes, trying to take down every word that the teacher says, you are not actually learning, and you're not actually listening, and you're not actually participating with your brain in sort of engaging with that content. And so I would recommend that people do enhance their memory skills and their listening skills and their ability to take in that information and process it and think sort of on the fly. And if you need to, take notes afterwards. Now, that doesn't always work for everybody, I know, and it's a bit of a scary statement to say. I was forced into it, but I've done a lot of reading on this as well, and many authors would suggest that that is actually accidentally quite the good thing to do. So I left university. I went and practiced as a social worker for a number of years. I actually became a disability advocate after saying that I would never go and do anything in disability because I've got a disability, and just because you have a disability doesn't mean you have to do stuff about disability all the time. You might remember that I grew up in the bush and there was no other real people with disability anywhere near me. I didn't have any disabled peers. I didn't have any other blind people to hang out with. I did my best to incorporate myself into the mainstream world. I had some awesome experiences on Royal Blind Society camps where I did get to meet with other blind people once or twice a year for a week and do interesting things together, which was fantastic. I really loved those camps, partly because I had no one else in my regular life that had a disability or that I could relate to and talk with about these things. But I did end up going into disability advocacy, and again, I don't regret that either. I did a couple of years of that before going back to university and going to law school. And the world had changed quite a lot by now. At this point, I was able to get a lot of my textbooks electronically, get them online, or get them sent to me on a USB disk, or maybe even downloaded off the internet. And that enabled me to get my textbooks at the same time everybody else got them, and to engage in my learning a bit more like everybody else. But what I learned through my social work and my law degree is, and even through my high school years really, is that the importance of self-advocacy, the importance of being able to go and speak with a teacher or a lecturer or an adult or whoever it might be and say, I need some help. Or if we were to do something in a slightly different way, I think I'd be able to show you how much I know better. And this was really highlighted for me when I was in my law year. Law school was 3 years. And the first year and a half, my marks were quite average, maybe around 60, 63% average. And that wasn't necessarily because I didn't know what I was doing. It's just that I found it really difficult to complete the exams and to really show the lecturers what I knew. So after working with the lecturers for some time, getting to know them, working with them, we found different ways to examine me in my final years. I did some of my exams orally by speaking them. The lecturers trusted and knew me and said, well, look, all I want to know is that you know the stuff. Take the exam home, do it overnight, bring it back tomorrow. That'll be fine. Or, yes, I admit, they say, that if you extend a 3-hour exam by another hour, that's 4 hours. That's a long time. So how about you do half of it today and half of it tomorrow? And with that, my average ended up around 85, 90%, which was a far better average. But when you average out all the averages, I was still only sitting around 72 or 73%. And why I'm going into the detail here is for 2 reasons. One, the importance of self-advocacy, talking with the lecturers and with others, working out how you best can shine and being part of the solution, part of the problem-solving process, not just leaving it up to the lecturers and the teachers to go, oh, there's someone in the class who can't see. Let me take some time and effort to sort things out. I mean, there are the odd lecturer like that and the odd teacher like that, but most are not. And yes, you might have an itinerant teacher or a disability liaison officer or some other people who are responsible for your well-being and your progress. and they might be able to advocate for you, but they can never advocate for you like you can advocate for yourself, and to be part of helping work out the best way for you to shine. That's how I like to think about it. The other reason I mentioned this 73% is because to have a distinction average, you need to be 75%. And most law firms are looking for a 75% average at least before they even look at the rest of your application. So I was stuck in a bit of a bind. Do I disclose my disability? Say I'm blind. And because of that, it was difficult for me to shine as a student in the early years, but you'll see that my marks were much better at the end of it. And, so my real marks should be a bit higher than that. If I do that, they now know I'm blind. That might scare them off. But if I say nothing and they just see this application from a person who came from the bush, who's got a 73% average, I might not get a look in anyway. They might just put me on the not good enough pile. So I ended up speaking with friends of friends who worked within law firms. I went to interviews that was arranged for me by my colleagues who I'd met through law school, and I just used all my networks and every kind of trick in the book to just try and get my foot in the door somewhere. And I ended up getting my first job as a lawyer with Gilbert and Tobin Lawyers back in 2004. And that's where I said, I just need 3 months with you, please. With 3 months, I'll work for free. And with those 3 months, what I'll do is, whatever you need me to do. And there's no obligation after that. They agreed to that. They also agreed to pay me as well. And at the end of the 3 months, I remember one of the senior partners came into my office and then asked if I'd like to stay and remain there. And 16, 17 years later, I'm still at Gilbert and Tobin even now. I should say that it's also important to take responsibility for your own learning and your own self-development. In between finishing my social work degree and starting my job as a social worker, I was used to using a Keynote PC Plus. Some might remember that device. It was a dedicated laptop that had talking software on it, a bit like JAWS, but not quite. But it had its own operating system, its own word processor. And I knew that if I was going to get a job, I was going to need to learn Windows. I was going to need to learn Microsoft Word, Microsoft Office, Outlook, and all these other programs that I'd never used before. So during my Christmas holidays and my spare time, and when I was looking for a job, I would go into the State Library of New South Wales, where they had all of these great training books on CD. And I would go in there and listen to the CDs, use JAWS on a program that on a computer they had there, and taught myself. Nowadays, you can download that training material. You can have a trial version of JAWS, and you don't have to go anywhere. But yes, I'd get on the bus, I'd schleck it on into to the library, and I'd hang out in the library for hours and hours, days and days and weeks to teach myself these skills. And I'm forever learning things, because I just find learning is a fantastic thing to help progress you through your life and your career. But it also gives you so many discussion points, ways of interacting with other people. And so as well as learning, I would say embrace opportunities to experience things and experience life. And, having done a 21-kilometer Tough Mudder course and finishing it and being first blind person in the world to do it, I didn't do that because I wanted to be the first blind person in the world to do it. I didn't even know until a couple of weeks beforehand that was even an opportunity. I'd been training for months and months before then. I just wanted to see if I could do it. I was curious about what it was like. And so, with many of my achievements has really stemmed from curiosity, and for sort of this idea of, just have a go, dare to try is what I say, dare to try. And so if I was to think of some of those life mottos that I have developed in myself, and I look back and say, well, what is it that has helped me achieve what I have? I would say that it is about being curious. It's about daring to try. But the key one potentially that wraps all of this up is the idea of find a way. Find a way. if we are people who are blind, we miss out on about 93.5% of all of the material and information that everybody else gets through their eyes. So we are basically living in an environment where we are getting 7.5% of what everybody else gets. And that means that we can't get away from it. The world is not built for us. The world is built for those who use sight as their primary way of doing things. So we will always have to work out different ways and new ways of getting around things and doing things. And it's that innovation, it's that curiosity, it's about the drive and the grit, the determination, the persistence of just, it didn't work, let's try something else. It didn't work, let's try something else. That didn't work either, let's try something else. And working with others as well. That's the collaboration of your own life with others to help, design things in the way that you need, be it extra time for exams or, a new app or whatever it might be. And so, I'm getting close to the end of my time, I feel. I haven't checked the clock, but I reckon I can't be far off. I did want to spend a quick bit of time, though. There were some questions about COVID, and in an interesting way for me as a person working in a law firm, I'm so privileged and so blessed that my job is actually a job that can still be done during a time when we have a pandemic. I'm sitting at home right now using a video cam and a ring light. This is how I communicate with my staff and with my clients. I have all the software I need at home on my work computer, which is a laptop, which is portable. It lives with me here at home. All my clients can use technology. We communicate by email. And yes, there are some things that we miss by not being in the office. And I know that if I was to go back into the office, I'd have to take extra care because there's only so many people allowed in this room. You have to stick to this side. They've got markers on the floor that I'm sure I won't be able to see or feel. But I've made the choice, and my workplace is okay with it, that for now I don't need to come into the office at all. That everything that I need to do, I can do from home. And I am still a little bit wary of going out and about and using public transport and keeping physically distanced, knowing when I can or can't get on the bus, queuing up to get into the lifts to the high-rise tower up to level 35 down at Barangaroo here in Sydney. And I'm even a little bit cautious about using Uber and ride sharing, just because I don't want to be that guy that got into that car and got COVID and brought it home to his family. So for me, COVID has meant that I have spent the last 6 months pretty well sitting in this chair, in this little part of my house, talking to my camera just like this. And I probably am getting a little bit of cabin fever now, but at the end of the day, I'm still quite, every day just quite happy that I can keep working the way I have been working. There's so much in all of that story, and every little part of my life has many other stories around it that I'd love to share because a lot of them are funny and quite interesting. But I did forget to say that when I first moved to Sydney, it was a bit of a time for me to reinvent myself. And that was when I said, well, do I want to look like the clumsy, stupid guy because I'm not using a cane or anything that assists me? Or do I want to be the blind guy? And I got to a point where I was like, well, I just have to embrace this. I can't do anything about it. I'm blind, so be it. And I was about 18 when this happened. And it probably took me having to move out of my familiar environment. Because remember, I grew up in this little town, Karamba. I grew up, slowly lost my sight. I went from mostly seeing to not seeing, but still staying in the same place. So when I moved to a different place where I had no history and no friends and no one that I really knew before, I was like almost a little bit of a time to reinvent myself. And I did start to use a cane. I remember I was in the middle of the Sydney CBD and I was meeting a friend for lunch or something, and I asked someone next to me what the time was. And I didn't even know what they were doing because I couldn't see, but I understood later that they just pointed behind me. And behind me was like the town hall clock, right there, the biggest freaking clock in the city. And there I am, obviously looking very stupid. And I decided that I'd rather look blind than stupid, and embrace my disability. And I'm, proudly have my disability. If someone said, we can give you your sight back, would I take it? Yes, I think I probably would. If you had asked me that 10 years ago, I probably would have said no. But I feel like now I probably would say yes. But we can't live in hope that that's going to happen. We can't just wait for this. And I'm not expecting it ever to happen in my lifetime. So if you can't do anything about it, there's no point worrying about it. What you do is you get on with it. And that just brings that curiosity, the find a way and dare to try attitude. And with those things under your belt, you'll be off and you'll be successful. I might leave it there, Mike.
Fantastic. Thank you, Darren. We've had a few questions come in. So if you've got the time, I'll ask a few. Jackie's interested, could you talk about Braille and the place of Braille literacy in the modern world?
Sure.
And specifically, how do you respond to those who feel Braille has been replaced by electronic means in the modern world?
Well, I think still, if you're reading electronically, you're listening to it. It's going in through your ears, and it is someone, even if it's a device that you control letter by letter, line by line, by moving an arrow around, it is still something else reading to you. You are not reading it. And to be able to go out bush camping and to take out something and just sit there and read in silence without any technology, or even just on your back porch or wherever it might be, is still something very important for literacy in terms of how words are structured, how words are spelt, how sentences are formed. My spelling, as I admitted, isn't as good as it should be. I mean, with spell checker technology and me just actively trying to be better at it, I've gotten a lot better over the years, but I've never been the best at it. Particularly when they sound the same, right? The word sight, S-I-G-H-T, is completely different from the word sight, C-I-T-E, which is completely different from the word sight, S-I-T-E. So which one do you use when? I mean, they all sound the same. And I used to say, and maybe I still say, that, well, if we can understand each other and know the difference when we talk it, why do we have to spell it differently? Right? Because we don't say, oh, I'd like to cite that article, C-I-T-E, just after I visited the website, S-I-T-E. We don't tell people how we are spelling things when we speak. We know what it means by the context, but that's not the way our world currently works. I think Braille also, because when I do, if you find yourself in a position where you might want to be presenting submissions to a high court judge, if you're reading out a eulogy at a funeral, if you're reading a Bible verse at a wedding, if you're, delivering a speech to your classmates, if you're engaged in a debating competition, it is very, very hard to listen to something talking to you and to speak at the same time, like really hard. And having notes at your fingertips, literally, and reading out loud and speaking out loud is much easier. I can't do that, which brought another skill to me, which is I can public speak for hours without notes because I don't know any other way to do it. But I would have loved to have had Braille as an option. And as I get into my older years and start to maybe work less and retire, I'm talking in another 10, 20 years time, maybe I'll get into Braille a bit more. I just don't have the time right now to dedicate to Braille learning, which means I'm probably not going to learn it now for a long time yet. But I'd encourage everybody who has the opportunity to learn Braille to learn it. I'd encourage everybody that has the opportunity to teach Braille to teach it, and let someone, by the time they get to 16, 17, 18, well, they can make their own call at that point if they want to continue it or not. But I think in the early years, we should all be learning Braille.
I'll take that as emphatic 1-0 Braille win.
Yes.
I'll ask you one more question and then we'll move on, because there's everything I touch where we're running late, of course. So have you found that in dealing with clients or in dealing with colleagues or third-party businesses, that they've doubted your abilities just because you're Braille? You're blind, sorry.
I'm blind. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All the time. If you're blind, you must be, not as good. If you're blind, you must be stupid. If you're blind, it's all going to be too hard. If you're blind, it's going to take longer, and we could substitute anything into that, because you have some other disability, because you're a woman, because you're Aboriginal, because you're, because you're gay, because of some other minority community attribute. And certainly there are many, particularly for disabilities. It's no surprise. Well, it's not. There's good reason why the unemployment rates of people with disability is so high, is because employers underestimate and don't understand the capability and the ability of people with disability. And a lot of that is because they don't have the life experience, they don't have the lived experience, they might not have come across people with disability before. But the more people with disability that can get out and about, because our buses are accessible, because the ATMs are accessible, because, the way in which the community works is more readily available, the more visibility of people with disability, I guess, the better. But I mean, the other thing we have to admit is that some of it is true. And I know that it takes me longer to get stuff done at work than it does for some of my peers. And when you're a lawyer and you are billing by the minute or by the 6 minutes, and you take longer than someone else, which means you're going to be more expensive than someone else, the senior lawyers and partners who are giving out the work are going to be more likely to give it to someone who can actually be more efficient. And it has not been an easy pathway through my legal career to find the ability to convince partners and others to give me work, to give me a chance. And I'm now a partner. I've fought that fight, but the fight's not over. And even being a partner, the things that I have to achieve in a day, compared to what others have to achieve in a day are the same, but it just takes me longer. When PDFs aren't readable and I have to, scan them and OCR them and deal with them, when Outlook emails open, a little bit slowly before I can get in there because I can't see the review pane, anything that takes 2-3 seconds more than anyone else is still a long time if you do it 100 times a day, right? So a strong work ethic is something that is often needed. And so, if my peers are doing 10 or 11 hour days, I'm doing 14, 15 hour days. That's just reality, because the systems in place, as I said, the world is not built for us. The world is not built or designed for blind people. We would love it to be, and things are getting better often, not all the time, but we just have to work harder.
There we go. Darren, I'm going to pass on. We've also had some thanks come in the chat and in the Q&A. That has been a real call to arms and a really innovating talk. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. And as a parent, thank you for giving me some insight into where we're headed.
My pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Now,